Viewer discretion is advised. This presentation explores a historical case involving claims of severe child abuse and neglect. The details may be disturbing to some audiences. He appeared on a city street as if from another world. It was Whit Monday, May 26, 1828, in the ancient city of Nuremberg, Germany. A local shoemaker was leaving a tavern when he saw him. A boy, maybe 16 years old, stumbling, swaying, his eyes struggling to focus in the bright daylight. He was dressed in a bizarre mix of peasant clothes and ill-fitting formal wear, a strange patched-together costume. His walk was less of a stride and more of a lurch, like a toddler first learning to use its legs, his knees buckling with every agonizing step. He seemed utterly lost. A ghost materialized in the middle of a bustling city square. The shoemaker approached, asking him his name, where he was from. The boy just stared, his eyes wide with a kind of primal terror and confusion. He moaned, uttering only a few garbled phrases, the same ones over and over again, and clutched in his hand was a letter. It was addressed to the captain of the 4th Squadron, 6th Cavalry Regiment. The shoemaker, bewildered, led the strange boy towards the captain's house. This single event would ignite a mystery that would baffle Europe for centuries, a mystery that raises the terrifying question: what happens when a human being is raised without humanity? What do they become? At the captain's home, the situation only grew stranger. The boy couldn't speak in coherent sentences. When offered meat and beer, he recoiled in disgust, spitting it out as if poisoned. But when given simple black bread and water, he devoured it greedily. He seemed to have no concept of social norms, no understanding of language beyond a few repeated, cryptic phrases. One of them was, "I want to be a horseman like my father was." He would say it again and again, a broken record of a memory he couldn't explain. He was fascinated by the glint of a cavalry saber, but terrified by the ticking of a simple clock. His senses were impossibly acute. He could see perfectly in the dark and could identify people by their smell from a great distance. But the light of a single candle caused him physical pain. He was a paradox, a boy on the cusp of manhood with the mind and motor skills of an infant. Who was he? And more importantly, where on earth had he come from? The letter he carried only deepened the enigma. In fact, there were two letters, one tucked inside the other. The first was a short, almost taunting note written in a crude hand. It was dated 1828 and claimed to be from an uneducated laborer who had been caring for the boy in secret since he was an infant, delivered to his doorstep in October of 1812. The writer said he had never let the boy take a single step out of the house, and had taught him to read and write. He claimed he was now releasing the boy into the world because he had 10 children of his own and couldn't support another. He instructed the captain to either take him in and make him a soldier, or hang him. The letter was signed only with the letter. The second letter was even more disturbing. It was supposedly written 16 years earlier in 1812 by the boy's own mother. It was written in a more refined, almost elegant script, but with the same ink and on the same type of paper as the first. This letter claimed the boy was born on April 30th, 1812, and his name was Kaspar. It stated that his father, a cavalryman in the 6th Regiment, was dead. The letter, penned by a mother supposedly abandoning her newborn son, pleaded with the future caretaker to raise him until the age of 17, then sent him to Nuremberg to join his father's old regiment. It was a heartbreaking plea from a desperate mother. But the contradictions were glaring. How could two letters, written 16 years apart, be on identical paper with identical ink? Why would a poor laborer who couldn't afford to feed the boy hold on to him for 16 years? And why would a mother who cared enough to write a letter abandon her child in the first place? The letters felt like a performance, a carefully constructed piece of theater designed not to explain, but to obscure. The authorities were stumped. They took the boy, now known as Kaspar Hauser, into custody. He was placed in a cell in the city jail, not as a criminal, but as a ward of the state, a foundling. It was here, in the quiet solitude of his cell, that the true horror of his past began to surface. He showed no understanding of fire, of mirrors, of his own reflection. He played with toy horses for hours, his only source of comfort. He seemed to have no concept of time, no memory of a life before his sudden appearance in Nuremberg. His world, it seemed, had been impossibly small. When questioned, he couldn't describe a house, a tree, a human face. He could only describe darkness. A small space. A dirt floor. bread and water pushed to him by an unseen hand. He claimed he had spent his entire life in a dark cell, no bigger than a closet, unable to stand, unable to see the sun, with no human contact except for a shadowy figure who gave him food and occasionally cleaned him. He said he never saw this person's face. This was the story that began to emerge. A human being kept in a cage like an animal, deprived of light, sound, and love for 16 years, fed and watered just enough to stay alive, then released into a world he couldn't possibly comprehend. The people of Nuremberg were horrified and fascinated. News of the wild child spread like wildfire across Europe. He became an overnight celebrity, a living scientific curiosity. Philosophers, doctors, lawyers, and nobles flocked to see him. Was his story true? Could a human being even survive such an ordeal? The city of Nuremberg officially adopted him, appointing a respected schoolmaster named George Friedrich Daumer to be his guardian and teacher. The goal was simple: to civilize Kaspar Hauser, to teach him to speak, to write, to be human. But in trying to unlock the secrets of his past, they would unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would lead to violence, intrigue, and a final bloody mystery. Because as Kaspar began to learn and to remember, powerful people began to take notice. And it soon became clear that someone somewhere did not want him to tell his story. The question was no longer just where he had come from. The question became, who was so terrified of his existence that they would go to any length to silence him forever? The first attempt came on a cool October afternoon in 1829. It was brutal, silent, and executed with a chilling purpose. In a quiet corner of a house that was supposed to be his sanctuary, a dark figure struck, aiming not to warn but to end. This single act of violence transformed the strange tale of Kaspar Hauser from a public curiosity into a deadly conspiracy. To understand how he got here, how this boy who knew nothing of the world became the target of a hidden enemy, we have to go back to the man who first opened his mind. After his bizarre appearance and brief stay in the city jail, the case of Kaspar Hauser fell to the city of Nuremberg. They took legal custody of him, declaring him a ward of the city. The mystery was too profound to ignore. He was moved into the care of a man named George Friedrich Daumer, a brilliant but eccentric schoolmaster and philosopher. It was a decision that would change everything. For the first time in his life, Kaspar experienced something akin to a home. Daumer's house was not a prison cell. It was a world of books, of conversation, of patient instruction. And Kaspar was a sponge. His progress was nothing short of miraculous. The boy who could barely form a sentence began to speak, then to read, then to write. Each new word, each new concept was a revelation. He was like a man from another planet, seeing our world for the first time, and his observations were both childlike and deeply profound. He called a horse a proud peasant's joy, and a cat a pounce animal. He couldn't understand why statues of men on horseback didn't just run away. Everything we take for granted he saw with fresh, uncorrupted eyes. His senses were astonishingly acute, almost superhuman. Having spent his entire life in near total darkness, his eyes could see with perfect clarity in conditions that were pitch black to everyone else. He could identify colors in the dark. But daylight, the normal everyday sun, was agony to him. It was a physical pain. His sense of smell was so powerful that he could distinguish apple trees from pear trees from 100 paces away, just by the scent of their leaves. But the smell of a graveyard, miles from the city, once made him physically ill. He also displayed an unusual sensitivity to metals and magnetism. He would claim that a hidden needle made his body feel like it was being pulled from one side. He could reportedly feel the north and south poles of a magnet, describing one as an outward-flowing stream of air, the other as an inward-drawing one. These were not tricks. To him, they were as real as the ground beneath his feet. Daumer documented it all, fascinated. He wasn't just teaching a boy to read. He was studying a human being who had developed completely outside of human society. Kaspar was a living experiment, a window into the raw, untamed nature of the human mind. But as his mind opened, something else began to stir. Deep within the darkness of his past, flickers of memory started to surface. First, they were just confusing dreams. He would wake up, disturbed, trying to explain images he didn't have the words for. He told Daumer of a room, a very small, very dark room. He couldn't stand up in it. He couldn't stretch his legs. He remembered sleeping on straw. He remembered a man whose face he never saw, who would come while he was asleep to leave him bread and water. And he remembered his only companions, 2 wooden horses and a dog carved from wood. He called them his Buben, his boys. He would spend his waking hours, which he couldn't distinguish from his sleeping hours, playing with these silent, wooden friends in the pitch-black void. He described how the man, the faceless man, would sometimes come and move his hands, teaching him how to write a few words, though he had no idea what they meant. Then one day the man carried him out. It was the first time he had ever been outside. The light, the colors, the sounds, it was an overwhelming, terrifying assault on his senses. He fainted repeatedly. The man dressed him, put shoes on his feet, another alien sensation, and forced him to walk. He taught him the phrase, "I want to be a cavalryman like my father was," and then finally left him on the road to Nuremberg with the letter in his hand. Daumer listened, spellbound, and encouraged Kaspar to write everything down. This was the key. This was the story the world was waiting for. Kaspar's journal became a record of a life stolen. He wrote about the suffocating darkness, the crushing loneliness, the utter lack of human contact. He wasn't a feral child raised by wolves. He was a prisoner deliberately and systematically deprived of all human experience. The details were sparse, but they painted a horrifying picture. And the more he wrote, the more he remembered. The more he remembered, the clearer the picture of his imprisonment became. And the clearer that picture became, the greater the danger he was in. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase this boy from the world, to keep him a blank slate. But the slate was no longer blank. It was being filled in word by horrifying word. And that person or the people behind him were watching. They saw his story appearing in newspapers across Europe. They saw him becoming a celebrity, the child of Europe. And they realized that their secret was no longer safe. The living evidence of their crime was learning to speak, and he had to be silenced. Which brings us back to that October afternoon. Kaspar was in Daumer's house. He had gone down to a small, isolated room in the cellar to use the privy. He was alone. Suddenly a figure appeared. A man, his face concealed by a black silk mask. Before Kaspar could even scream, the man lunged, striking him on the forehead with what was later described as a meat cleaver or a razor. The blow was heavy. Kaspar fell to the ground, blood pouring from a deep gash. He lay there, stunned, as the attacker whispered in his ear, "You still have to die ere you leave the city of Nuremberg." Then, as quickly as he had appeared, the masked man was gone. Dazed and bleeding, Kaspar managed to stagger upstairs. He didn't tell Daumer's mother what had happened at first. He just pointed to the cellar and mumbled about the man. When she finally saw the blood streaming down his face, the house erupted in chaos. The attack was no accident. It was a clear, unambiguous message. The wound was serious, but by some miracle, not fatal. Kaspar Hauser had survived his first assassination attempt. The news spread through Nuremberg like wildfire. The city was in an uproar. This wasn't some wild story anymore. This wasn't a hoax. Frauds don't get attacked by masked assassins. The attempt on his life was the ultimate validation of his story. It proved beyond any doubt that Kaspar Hauser was exactly who he claimed to be. A victim of a terrible crime, and a living threat to a powerful unknown enemy. The city posted a massive reward for the capture of the attacker, and assigned 2 police officers to guard Kaspar around the clock. But the damage was done. The sanctuary of Daumer's home had been violated. The psychological trauma of the attack was immense, setting back his progress and plunging him into a state of fear and paranoia. He now knew with terrifying certainty that the man from the darkness had not forgotten him, and the chilling promise whispered in his ear hung in the air. He would not be safe, not anywhere. The question now was not just who he was, but what secret from his past was so monumental, so earth-shattering, that someone would commit murder in broad daylight to protect it? The city of Nuremberg, which had once buzzed with curiosity about the boy from nowhere, now thrummed with a new, more sinister energy, fear. The attack on Kaspar Hauser wasn't just an assault on an individual. It was an assault on the city's sense of security, a violent intrusion of a dark, unknown past into their orderly present. The news spread like fire through the cobblestone streets. The boy who had been a living riddle was now a living target. Professor Daumer, horrified, found him bleeding in the cellar, a deep gash on his forehead. Kaspar, barely conscious, managed to whisper about a man with a black silk mask, a man who had spoken to him, Not with a threat, but with a chilling final judgment. You still have to die in the city of Nuremberg. The word suggested this wasn't a random act of violence. It was an execution, one that had been merely postponed. The police were called. An investigation was launched, but it was a phantom hunt. The attacker had vanished as if he were never there, leaving behind only a terrified boy and a bloodstain on the floor. There were no witnesses, no clues, no motive beyond the one locked inside Kaspar's fragmented mind. The authorities were baffled. How do you find an assassin when you don't even know the identity of his victim? The city offered a massive reward for information, but the silence was absolute. It was as if the masked man had been a ghost, a specter sent from Kaspar's past to drag him back into the abyss. It became terrifyingly clear that Professor Daumer's home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a bullseye. For his own safety, Kaspar was moved into the care of a respected municipal official, Johann Biberbach. He was placed under constant police protection, 2 guards assigned to him at all times. But this wasn't a life, it was a gilded cage. He was a prisoner of his own mystery. The friendly curiosity of the public curdled into a mix of pity and suspicion. Some saw him as a tragic victim, a lost soul hunted by powerful enemies. Others began to whisper that the boy was more trouble than he was worth, a magnet for violence. Perhaps, they murmured, the attack wasn't what it seemed. Perhaps the boy had inflicted the wound on himself for attention. The narrative was beginning to fracture. Just as the trail went cold and public interest began to wane, the story took a dramatic international turn. News of the strange boy in Nuremberg and the attempt on his life had crossed borders, reaching the ears of Europe's elite. And one man in particular became utterly captivated by the tale. His name was Philip Henry Stanhope, the 4th Earl Stanhope, a fabulously wealthy, eccentric, and powerful British nobleman. Lord Stanhope was a man who collected curiosities, and Kaspar Hauser was the ultimate human curiosity. He saw in Kaspar not just a mystery, but a project, a puzzle he, with his immense resources and intellect, was uniquely qualified to solve. In 1831, Lord Stanhope descended upon Nuremberg like a character from a novel, all sweeping cloaks and aristocratic pronouncements. He was charming, intelligent, and determined. He met with the city officials, he interviewed those who knew Kaspar, and he poured money into the investigation, offering even larger rewards. To the beleaguered city, he seemed like a savior, a white knight arriving from across the sea to champion Kaspar's cause. He quickly gained legal custody of Kaspar, becoming his official guardian and benefactor. He promised to spare no expense to uncover the truth of Kaspar's parentage and bring his tormentors to justice. For Kaspar, this must have been a bewildering turn of events. He was moved from the modest home of a city official into a world of unimaginable luxury. Stanhope lavished him with gifts, fine clothes, and private tutors. He promised him a future, a life of security and status. But Stanhope's patronage came with a price. The nobleman's methods for jogging Kaspar's memory were unorthodox. They were less about gentle recollection and more about aggressive, almost theatrical psychological experiments. He would take Kaspar to scenic vistas, hoping a beautiful landscape might unlock a hidden memory. He would expose him to sudden loud noises, trying to trigger a reaction. He even, according to some accounts, tried to use hypnotism. Stanhope was not just an investigator. He was a showman, and Kaspar was his star attraction. Then came the most bizarre chapter of their association. Based on some of Kaspar's vague, dreamlike recollections of coats of arms and grand halls, Lord Stanhope became convinced that Kaspar had Hungarian roots. He concocted a theory that Kaspar was the son of a noble Hungarian family, stolen away in infancy. And so, in a grand and expensive expedition, he took Kaspar to Hungary. For weeks, they traveled the Hungarian countryside. Stanhope would stage elaborate encounters, hiring actors to play the parts of long-lost relatives, presenting Kaspar to noble families, hoping to see a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He would point to castles and ask, "Does this look familiar? Did you live here?" The entire journey was a surreal spectacle. Kaspar, overwhelmed and confused, could offer nothing. He recognized no one, no place, no language. The trip was a colossal failure, a wild goose chase that yielded absolutely nothing. And it was here, in the wake of this expensive fiasco, that Lord Stanhope's attitude began to change. The benevolent guardian started to show a different side. The initial fascination soured into frustration, then into cold suspicion. He had invested a fortune, his time, and his considerable reputation into this boy, and he was getting no results. The puzzle was refusing to be solved. And so, Stanhope began to consider a different possibility. What if there was no puzzle at all? What if the box was empty? He began to subtly, and then overtly, question Kaspar's story. He pointed to inconsistencies in his accounts, moments where his memory seemed too convenient or too vague. He started to suggest that Kaspar wasn't a victim of a grand conspiracy, but a clever impostor, a fraud of astonishing skill. He accused the boy of being a pathological liar, someone who had invented his entire history of captivity to escape a life of poverty and gain fame and fortune. The man who had once been Kaspar's greatest champion was now methodically, publicly, beginning to dismantle his credibility. He wrote letters to officials, to academics, to newspapers across Europe, laying out his case against the boy. He used his immense influence to paint Kaspar not as a feral child, but as a cunning manipulator. Imagine the psychological torment for Kaspar. He had been attacked by a masked man, a physical threat from a shadowy past. But this was a new kind of assault, one that was perhaps even more devastating. It was an attack on his identity, on his very reality, coming from the one person who had promised him protection. The world had first seen him as a marvel, then as a victim. Now, thanks to the powerful Earl Stanhope, it was beginning to see him as a monster. The shift was seismic. Kaspar was trapped. He had no memory to prove his own story, and the most powerful man he knew was now his chief accuser. The physical guards who protected him from assassins were useless against this new threat. This was an assassination of his character, carried out in the open, by the very man who held his life in his hands. The question was no longer just about who had locked him in the dark for all those years. A new, more pressing question now emerged. Why would Lord Stanhope, after investing so much to save Kaspar Hauser, suddenly become so determined to destroy him? To understand Stanhope's reversal, you have to understand the man himself. Lord Stanhope was an eccentric, a romantic, a man obsessed with grand narratives and epic mysteries. In Kaspar Hauser, he believed he had found the ultimate story. A real-life fairy tale, a lost prince, a puzzle for the ages. He poured his resources into Kaspar not just out of charity, but out of a desire to be the hero who solved the riddle. He wanted to be the one to uncover the secret, to restore the boy to his rightful place, and to have his own name etched into history alongside Kaspar's. But what happens when the story doesn't unfold the way you want it to? What happens when the puzzle pieces don't fit the picture you've already painted in your mind? Stanhope's investigation into Kaspar's origins had one fatal flaw. It was never a search for the truth. It was a search for a specific truth, the one he had already decided upon, that Kaspar was of noble, likely royal Hungarian blood. Every clue was viewed through this lens. Every dead end was seen not as evidence to the contrary, but as a conspiracy to hide the very royalty he was so desperate to prove. The first cracks in the relationship began to show in private. Stanhope's methods of helping Kaspar remember his past became less like gentle encouragement and more like relentless interrogations. He would press Kaspar for hours, demanding details of his early childhood, of his captor, of the dungeon. But Kaspar's memories were a fog, a collection of sensory fragments, not a linear narrative. He remembered darkness, the taste of bread, the feel of straw, the wooden horses. He couldn't provide names, dates, or locations. For a man like Stanhope, who dealt in facts and evidence, this was infuriating. He started to see Kaspar's inability to remember as an unwillingness to cooperate. He started to suspect it wasn't a damaged memory, but a deliberate deception. The public, of course, saw none of this. They still saw the benevolent English lord and his tragic young ward. But behind closed doors, the dynamic was shifting from protector and protected to prosecutor and suspect. Stanhope began meticulously documenting every tiny inconsistency in Kaspar's story. If one day Kaspar said the bread he was fed had caraway seeds and the next day he forgot to mention it, Stanhope noted it down. If his description of the wooden horses varied even slightly, it was recorded as a potential lie. He was building a case against the very boy he had sworn to save. The turning point was a grand, ill-fated journey. Convinced that the key lay in Hungary, Stanhope announced he was taking Kaspar on a trip across the continent. Publicly, it was billed as a quest to find Kaspar's homeland. For Kaspar, it must have felt like a dream come true, a chance to finally discover who he was. But the reality of the trip was a nightmare. It was not a journey of discovery. It was a traveling inquisition. In Hungary, Stanhope paraded Kaspar through towns and villages. He would have him stand before crowds, hoping someone would recognize him. He arranged meetings with Hungarian nobles, scrutinizing their faces for any flicker of recognition. But nothing came of it. No one knew the boy. The trip, meant to be the triumphant confirmation of Stanhope's theory, was becoming a humiliating failure. And with every failed lead, Stanhope's frustration grew, and he directed it all at Kaspar. He accused the boy of deliberately concealing his identity, of refusing to recognize places he must have known. Kaspar, bewildered and terrified in a foreign land, surrounded by strangers speaking a language he didn't understand, could only weep and insist he knew nothing. To Stanhope, his tears were no longer a sign of trauma. They were the performance of a guilty fraud. The final devastating blow came during this trip. Stanhope, in his frantic search, presented Kaspar with a portrait of a deceased Hungarian countess, a woman he suspected might be Kaspar's mother. He watched Kaspar's face, expecting a flood of repressed memory, a cry of recognition. But Kaspar just stared at the painting with polite confusion. He saw a stranger. In that moment, Stanhope's entire fantasy collapsed. The grand narrative he had constructed, with himself as the hero and Kaspar as the lost prince, dissolved into dust, and his adoration curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. If Kaspar wasn't a prince, then what was he? In Stanhope's black and white world, there was no middle ground. If he wasn't a victim of an incredible conspiracy, he must be the perpetrator of an incredible lie. The journey back to Germany was cold and silent. The man who had been Kaspar's father figure now looked at him with contempt. Upon their return to Nuremberg, Stanhope wasted no time. He began a systematic, ruthless campaign to dismantle the myth he himself had helped build. He used the very same influence and wealth he had once used to promote Kaspar to now utterly destroy him. He published pamphlets, gave interviews, and wrote letters to powerful figures all across Europe. He used the evidence he had gathered, the minor inconsistencies, the failed trip to Hungary, Kaspar's inability to provide a neat, tidy story, as proof of a massive deception. He painted a new picture of Kaspar Hauser. This wasn't a feral child raised in darkness. This was a cunning peasant boy, a pathological liar who had concocted an elaborate story to gain fame and fortune. He claimed Kaspar's sensitivity to light and sound was an act, his strange eating habits a performance, his childlike innocence a carefully crafted mask. Stanhope, the brilliant English lord, claimed he had been duped, but had now seen the light and was exposing the fraud for the good of the public. The effect was catastrophic. Society, which had so eagerly embraced the romantic mystery of Kaspar Hauser, was now presented with a compelling counter-narrative from his most powerful supporter. People were forced to choose a side. Was Kaspar a tragic victim or a master manipulator? Was Lord Stanhope a noble truth-seeker or a spurned patron exacting cruel revenge? The city of Nuremberg, and indeed much of Europe, was split down the middle. Friends became enemies, and public debate raged in newspapers and salons. For Kaspar, it was the ultimate betrayal. He had been rescued from one prison only to be thrust into another, a prison of public scorn, suspicion, and confusion. The man who had promised him the world, who had taught him to speak and write and engage with society, was now using those very skills against him, twisting his words, weaponizing his trauma. Lord Stanhope's final act was one of calculated cruelty. He formally renounced his guardianship, effectively abandoning Kaspar. He left him in the care of a local schoolteacher, a kind but ultimately powerless man named Johann Georg Meyer. But before he departed Germany, Stanhope delivered a parting shot. He compiled all of his evidence into a damning report, a detailed character assassination that he circulated widely. He concluded his report with a chilling declaration. Kaspar Hauser, he wrote, was an impostor and a humbug. And with that, Lord Stanhope washed his hands of the boy and returned to England, leaving Kaspar alone to face a world that no longer knew what to believe. Kaspar was once again an outcast, but this time it was worse. Before, he was a mystery, an object of pity and fascination. Now he was a controversy, an object of suspicion. Stanhope hadn't just taken away his protection. He had poisoned the very air Kaspar breathed. He had taken his story, the only thing Kaspar truly owned, and shattered it into a million pieces. Kaspar was left in the quiet home of a schoolteacher. His world smaller and more precarious than ever. The international spotlight had dimmed. The powerful patrons had vanished. He was just a young man, trying to navigate a life that had been defined by two great betrayals. First by the unknown captor who stole his childhood, and now by the man who had promised to give him a future. He was safer, perhaps, than he had been in his dungeon, but he was also more alone than ever, and the danger was far from over. The attacks on his character were about to escalate into attacks on his life. The question was no longer about Stanhope's motives. A new, more terrifying question was taking its place. If Stanhope was content to simply ruin him, who was the person who now wanted him dead? The answer would arrive with the chilling finality of a blade in the dark. It was October 17, 1829, a day that began like any other in the quiet intellectual sanctuary of Professor Daumer's home. Kaspar was continuing his studies, his world expanding with every book he read, every conversation he had. The public controversy stirred by Lord Stanhope felt like a distant storm, noisy but ultimately harmless. He was safe here. He was cared for. The four walls of Daumer's house were a fortress against the cruelties of the world. But a fortress is only as strong as its weakest point. That afternoon, Kaspar was alone in the house. He needed to use the privy, which was located on the ground floor, near a small dark cellar. As he made his way down the stairs, the familiar creaks of the floorboards were the only sounds accompanying his thoughts. The air grew cooler, damper. He reached the ground floor, the silence of the empty house pressing in on him, and then he heard it. A soft sound, a shuffle, a breath that wasn't his own. He froze. Every nerve, honed by years of isolation and sensory deprivation, screamed at him. He was not alone. From the shadows of the cellar, a figure emerged. The man was a specter, a nightmare-given form. He was dressed entirely in black, his face obscured by a dark mask, leaving only his eyes visible, eyes that burned with a cold, terrifying purpose. Kaspar had no time to scream, no time to run. The figure lunged. There was a flash of metal, a searing white-hot pain across his forehead. He stumbled backward, his hands flying to his face, coming away wet and slick with his own blood. The masked man didn't press the attack. He simply stared for a moment, a silent, menacing presence, before turning and vanishing as quickly as he had appeared, melting back into the shadows from which he came. Kaspar, stunned and bleeding, collapsed onto the cold stone floor. The world swam around him, the pain in his head a roaring fire. He lay there, disoriented, the metallic tang of blood filling his senses. The fortress had been breached. The predator had found its way inside. It was Professor Daumer's mother who found him. Her shriek of horror echoed through the house, shattering the afternoon's peace. Kaspar was carried upstairs, his shirt stained crimson, his face pale with shock. A doctor was summoned, the authorities were called, and within an hour, the house was swarming with police officers, officials, and concerned neighbors. The news spread through Nuremberg like a contagion. The city's famous foundling, the gentle Enigma they had all been watching, had been attacked. As the doctor stitched the gash on his forehead, a frantic investigation began. What had happened? Who could have done this? Kaspar, weak and terrified, could offer little. He described the attacker. A man masked, dressed in black, his voice a harsh whisper. The man had said something to him, a cryptic, chilling phrase. Accounts differ on the exact words, but they all carried the same venomous weight. You must die before you leave the city of Nuremberg. The words hung in the air, a death sentence delivered in a whisper. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a targeted assassination attempt. The blade had been meant for his throat, but in his panicked recoil, Kaspar had saved his own life. The cut on his forehead was a warning, a promise of what was to come. The city of Nuremberg was thrown into an uproar. The public, who had followed Kaspar's story with a mix of fascination and pity, was now consumed by outrage and fear. This wasn't some abstract debate about his origins anymore. This was real. The mysterious forces that had imprisoned him for years were not content to let him live in peace. They had hunted him down. The story of the child of Europe took a dark, terrifying turn. He was no longer just a symbol of innocence lost. He was a man marked for death. The police investigation, led by the astute Anselm von Feuerbach, hit a wall almost immediately. There were no witnesses other than Kaspar. The attacker had left no trace, no clues, nothing but a terrified young man and a bloodstain on a cellar floor. Who was he? A hired assassin? The original jailer himself, emerging from the shadows to silence his former captive? The description Kaspar gave, a man in black masked, was the stuff of Gothic novels. It was too generic, too theatrical. Could it be anyone? Or no one? Suspicion naturally swirled. Could Lord Stanhope, a man who had publicly dedicated himself to discrediting Kaspar, be behind this? It seemed a monstrous leap. Stanhope used words and money as his weapons, not knives. To orchestrate a murder seemed beyond him. But the timing was undeniable. Just as Stanhope's campaign of character assassination reached its peak, a physical assassin appeared. Was it a coincidence? Or was Stanhope merely the public face of a much deadlier conspiracy? And what of the theory that Kaspar was a prince, the stolen heir to the throne of Baden? If that were true, then the attack made perfect, horrifying sense. It would mean that the usurpers who had stolen his birthright were now trying to eliminate the living proof of their crime. The masked man wasn't just a killer. He was an agent of a powerful, shadowy cabal, sent to protect a terrible secret. The attack transformed the Baden prince theory from a romantic fantasy into a plausible, life-or-death reality. Kaspar himself was shattered. The psychological trauma of the attack was far worse than the physical wound. The sense of safety he had so carefully built in Daumer's home was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing fear. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every unfamiliar face was a mask. His sleep was plagued by nightmares of the dark cellar, of the masked man, of the cold steel against his skin. The world, which had just begun to open up to him, had once again become a terrifying prison. He trusted no one. He was convinced the man in black would return to finish the job. It became painfully clear that he could no longer stay with Professor Daumer. The house, once a haven, was now a crime scene, a place of profound trauma. For his own protection, he needed to be moved somewhere more secure. A wealthy and respected municipal official named Johann Biberbach and his family offered to take him in. Their home was in a safer part of the city, and they could afford to provide him with constant supervision. 2 police guards were assigned to protect him around the clock. The move was a somber affair. Kaspar Hauser, the celebrated Enigma, was now effectively a prisoner once more. Not in a dark dungeon, but in a gilded cage of safety and surveillance. He was surrounded by people, yet more alone than ever. The attack had proven one thing beyond all doubt. His past was not a story to be studied, it was a living, breathing entity, and it was hunting him. He was safe for now, but the man in black was still out there. The whispered threat, "You must die," still echoed in his mind. The question was no longer who wanted him dead, but when they would try again. The city of Nuremberg, once a haven, had become a prison. Not a prison of stone and iron, but one of fear. Every shadow that danced on the wall, every creak of a floorboard, every unfamiliar face in the street was a potential echo of the man in the black coat. For Kaspar, the world he had just begun to embrace had snapped shut, its wonders replaced by a gallery of potential threats. His recovery was slow, not just from the gash on his forehead, but from the deeper wound carved into his psyche. The simple trust he had placed in humanity was gone, shattered by the cold steel of a blade. He became withdrawn, his progress in language and socialization stalling, even regressing. He would sit for hours staring into space, his mind clearly replaying the terrifying moments in the cellar. The man's face masked and monstrous, the glint of the weapon, the chilling finality of the words, "You must die." The attack sent shockwaves through Nuremberg and beyond. This was no longer a philosophical curiosity, a debate for academics and socialites. This was a criminal investigation, an attempted murder. The city authorities, led by the formidable jurist Paul Johann Anselm von Feuerbach, were galvanized. Feuerbach, a man of logic and law, saw the attack as a confirmation of his darkest suspicions. Someone powerful, someone with a deep and vested interest in Kaspar remaining silent, had just shown their hand. The gentle experiment of Kaspar's education was over. This was now a matter of life and death. 2 armed guards were posted outside Professor Daumer's house around the clock. Kaspar was forbidden from going out alone. His world, which had been expanding daily, shrank to the size of a few guarded rooms. He was a prisoner once more, only this time, the walls were built of concern and the bars were made of fear. The investigation, however, hit a wall almost immediately. The attacker had been like a ghost. No one saw him enter, no one saw him leave. The weapon, a sharp razor or knife, was never found. The description Kaspar gave was vague. A man in dark clothes, his face obscured. It was the perfect crime, executed with chilling precision, leaving behind nothing but a terrified victim and 1,000 frantic questions. And in the absence of facts, speculation rushed in to fill the void. The public, once universally sympathetic, began to fracture. Whispers started to circulate. The story was just too clean, too dramatic. Could Kaspar, a boy known for his vivid imagination, have made it all up? Perhaps the wound was self-inflicted, a desperate cry for attention as the novelty of his existence began to wear off. Newspapers, which had once celebrated him as the child of Europe, now printed skeptical editorials. The boy who had been a symbol of innocence was now, in the eyes of some, a potential fraud. He was trapped in an impossible position. The only proof of the attack was his own testimony, and his testimony was now being questioned precisely because of how extraordinary it was. But the assassination attempt did something else. It poured gasoline on the most sensational and dangerous theory of them all, the theory that Kaspar Hauser was not a commoner but royalty. Specifically, that he was the hereditary prince of the Grand Duchy of Baden, stolen from his cradle in 1812. To understand how explosive this was, you have to understand the politics of 19th century Germany. The House of Baden was a major royal family. In 1812, a male heir was born to the Grand Duke Karl and his wife, Stephanie de Beauharnais, a woman adopted by Napoleon Bonaparte himself. The baby was reported to be healthy and robust. But just 16 days later, the palace announced the infant prince had suddenly died. The throne eventually passed to a different branch of the family, the children of the Grand Duke's morganatic or unequal second marriage. But rumors had always persisted. Whispers of a white lady, a ghostly apparition, seen switching the healthy prince with the dying infant. A palace conspiracy to change the line of succession. For years it was just court gossip. But now here was Kaspar Hauser. He appeared out of nowhere, seemingly the right age. He was being tutored and cared for by the best minds in Germany. And now someone had tried to murder him. Why would anyone try to kill a poor, abandoned boy? But if he were the stolen prince, the rightful heir to a throne, then everything made a terrifying kind of sense. The man who held the throne of Baden, Grand Duke Ludwig, had a reputation for being ruthless. If he knew the true heir was alive, would he stop at anything to protect his illegitimate claim? Anselm von Feuerbach became the theory's most powerful champion. He compiled a secret memorandum, a damning collection of circumstantial evidence, pointing the finger directly at the House of Baden. He believed Kaspar's imprisonment was a calculated act to keep the prince hidden until the time was right, or to break his mind so he could never be a threat. The attack in the cellar wasn't random. It was a desperate attempt to silence him now that he was in the public eye, learning to speak and remember. The conspiracy wasn't a fantasy. It was a cold political reality. This theory turned Kaspar from a local celebrity into an international incident. He was no longer just a boy. He was a potential king, a living, breathing dynastic crisis. And that is when a new powerful player entered the game. His name was Philip Henry Stanhope, the 4th Earl of Stanhope, a wealthy and eccentric British nobleman. Lord Stanhope was a man of immense curiosity and even more immense resources. He traveled Europe, indulging his passions for science, history, and unsolved mysteries. And there was no greater mystery in Europe than Kaspar Hauser. Stanhope arrived in Nuremberg like a character from a novel. He was charming, intelligent, and utterly captivated by Kaspar's story. He spent lavishly showering Kaspar with gifts and attention. He dismissed the skeptics, insisting that Kaspar's innocence and trauma were genuine. He saw himself as a man of reason who could succeed where the German authorities had failed. He would fund a proper investigation, use his connections, and uncover the truth once and for all. He presented himself as Kaspar's ultimate savior. To the city officials, who were growing weary of the expense and controversy, Stanhope seemed like a godsend. Here was a man with the wealth and the will to take over Kaspar's protection and education. Professor Daumer, still shaken by the attack on his property and his ward, reluctantly agreed that a change of scenery might be for the best. And so, a decision was made. The fate of Kaspar Hauser would be placed into the hands of this enigmatic English lord. Kaspar, for his part, was mesmerized by Stanhope. The Earl was a figure of worldly power and confidence, a stark contrast to the gentle academic men who had been his teachers. Stanhope promised him a new life, a life of travel, of learning, of safety. He promised to be the father Kaspar never had, to protect him from the shadows that haunted him. It was an offer of escape, a chance to leave behind the cellar in Nuremberg, and the fear that now permeated every corner of the city. But as Kaspar prepared to leave the only real home he had ever known, a subtle unease began to creep in. Stanhope's interest was intense, almost obsessive. His questions were relentless, probing Kaspar's memory, testing his story, constantly searching for proof of his royal lineage. The Earl's generosity felt less like affection and more like an investment. Kaspar was trading one form of custody for another, leaving the protection of the city for the private ownership of a single powerful man. He was leaving the fishbowl of Nuremberg for a gilded cage, one whose bars were forged by British gold and aristocratic ambition. The question was this new keeper a savior, or simply a more sophisticated kind of jailer? Lord Philip Henry Stanhope was a force of nature, an English aristocrat of immense wealth and even greater eccentricity. He descended upon Nuremberg not as a quiet observer, but as a whirlwind of purpose. To the city officials, burdened by the expense and controversy of their famous ward, Stanhope must have seemed like a divine intervention. He was charismatic, determined, and he promised to take the entire Kaspar Hauser problem off their hands. For Kaspar, this was the dawn of a spectacular new chapter. Lord Stanhope didn't just offer protection. He offered a world Kaspar could only have dreamed of. He showered the boy with lavish gifts, fine clothes, a magnificent horse, trinkets, and books. He spoke of taking Kaspar to England, of giving him a world-class education, of truly making him a gentleman. It was a fairy tale come to life. The boy who had been raised in darkness was now to be adopted by an English lord, his future secured by the boundless resources of the British aristocracy. Kaspar was utterly captivated. Stanhope was a father figure, but a far more powerful and worldly one than Daumer or Toucher. He was a man of action, a man who could make things happen. And for a time, it seemed he was dedicating his entire existence to solving the riddle of Kaspar Hauser. Stanhope, you see, was not content to simply be a guardian. He was an investigator, and he intended to crack the case wide open. He poured thousands of florins, a fortune at the time, into a private investigation. He hired agents, interviewed witnesses, and chased down every lead, no matter how faint. His primary focus was the tantalizing clue from the anonymous letter found with Kaspar, the connection to the Hungarian border. Convinced that the secret to Kaspar's identity lay in the sprawling estates of Eastern Europe, Stanhope embarked on a grand journey to Hungary in 1831. He was searching for any record, any rumor of a noble family's hidden child, a lost prince. He spent months on this quest, fueled by a romantic vision of uncovering a grand conspiracy and restoring Kaspar to his rightful place. But the trip was a spectacular failure. He found nothing. No evidence of a swapped infant, no whispers of a sequestered heir, no family that matched the vague descriptions. There was not a single shred of corroboration for Kaspar's story. The grand conspiracy dissolved into thin air. And as Stanhope's investigation crumbled, so too did his faith in Kaspar. The journey back to Germany was a long one, and it gave the Lord ample time to think. He began to re-examine everything Kaspar had ever told him, but this time, he wasn't looking for confirmation. He was looking for cracks, and he found them everywhere. He started to notice inconsistencies, small contradictions in Kaspar's recollections of his dungeon. One day Kaspar would remember the man who brought him food having certain features, another day they would be different. He claimed to have subsisted only on bread and water, yet physicians noted he was in remarkably good health for someone who had endured such an ordeal. He claimed to have never seen a human face, yet he wasn't terrified by them. He claimed to have the mind of a child, yet he learned to read, write, and debate with astonishing speed. To Stanhope, these weren't the signs of a traumatized mind struggling to piece together a fragmented past. They were the telltale signs of a liar, a very, very clever liar. The English lord, who had arrived as a savior, was now transforming into a prosecutor. His fascination curdled into suspicion, his affection into contempt. He began to subject Kaspar to relentless interrogations, not as a curious guardian, but as a skeptical inquisitor. He would ask the same questions over and over, trying to catch Kaspar in a lie. He would present Kaspar with trick questions with logical traps. The warm, paternal relationship evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical atmosphere of distrust. Kaspar, who had idolized Stanhope, was bewildered and terrified. The man who had promised him the world was now accusing him of fabricating his entire existence. In Stanhope's mind, a new theory was taking shape, one that was far less romantic than a lost prince. He concluded Kaspar Hauser was a fraud, an impostor of breathtaking audacity, who had concocted an elaborate story to gain fame and fortune. Stanhope theorized that Kaspar was likely an orphan from a poor background who had been coached by some unknown party to play the part of the wild child. The promised trip to England was indefinitely postponed, then forgotten entirely. Stanhope's letters from this period are brutal. He describes Kaspar as a cunning, artful deceiver, a liar and a hypocrite, the very qualities he once admired. Kaspar's quick learning, his curiosity, were now reframed as evidence of his deception. A truly feral child, Stanhope reasoned, would not be able to adapt so quickly. The dream was over. Lord Stanhope had spent a fortune and staked his reputation on solving the mystery, and when he failed, he blamed the puzzle itself. He couldn't bear the thought of being duped, so he washed his hands of Kaspar. But he couldn't just abandon him. That would be a public relations disaster. He had to place him somewhere. And so, in late 1831, Lord Stanhope made arrangements to move Kaspar from the relative freedom and intellectual stimulation of Nuremberg to the sleepy, provincial town of Ansbach. It was a deliberate demotion. Kaspar was no longer a subject of European fascination to be groomed for high society. He was a problem to be managed. And to manage him, Stanhope appointed a new guardian, a man he believed was perfectly suited for the task of dealing with a cunning liar, a local schoolmaster named Johann Georg Meyer. If Professor Daumer had been the gentle, nurturing intellectual who awakened Kaspar's mind, Meyer was his polar opposite. He was a stern, pedantic, and deeply unimaginative man. He was a rigid disciplinarian who saw his new ward not as a victim to be nurtured, but as a delinquent to be broken. Meyer was informed of Stanhope's suspicions before Kaspar even arrived, and he embraced them wholeheartedly. His primary mission, as he saw it, was not to educate Kaspar, but to expose him, to wring a confession out of him. The home in Ansbach became a new kind of prison. Meyer chronicled every perceived flaw, every minor transgression in his diary. He complained about Kaspar's supposed vanity, his laziness, his penchant for telling small fibs, which Meyer magnified into proof of his grand deception. He monitored Kaspar's every move, questioned his every statement. For Kaspar, this was the ultimate betrayal. He had been passed from the city of Nuremberg to a powerful lord, and now from that lord to a small-town tyrant. He was more isolated than ever. In Nuremberg, he had supporters, friends, and a public that was largely on his side. In Ansbach, he had only Meyer, a man who viewed him with constant, undisguised contempt. He was given a menial job as a copyist in the local law courts, a tedious, soul-crushing task for a mind that had once debated philosophy with the city's greatest thinkers. The vibrant world that had opened up to him was now shrinking, closing in on him once again. He was trapped in a web of suspicion spun by the very man who had promised him salvation. Lord Stanhope, his former champion, was now his chief accuser, poisoning opinions against him from afar. Kaspar was losing the narrative. The story of the noble victim was being replaced by the story of the cunning fraud. He was cornered, desperate, and his entire identity was being systematically dismantled by the people who held power over him. The psychological pressure was immense, building day by day in the quiet, suffocating confines of Ansbach. A person can only be pushed so far, and Kaspar Hauser was being pushed toward a breaking point from which there would be no return. The winter of 1833 in Ansbach was cold and bleak, a perfect mirror for Kaspar Hauser's state of mind. The constant scrutiny of his guardian Johann Meyer, the rigid timetables, the endless accusations of being a liar and a fraud. It was a prison of a different kind. The walls weren't made of stone, but of suspicion. Lord Stanhope, his once great champion, was now a distant figure in England, his letters growing cooler, his financial support conditional on Kaspar proving himself, on becoming someone he simply wasn't. The pressure was no longer a slow, crushing weight. It was a sharp, stabbing pain, a desperate need for a way out, for a way to make them all believe again. On December 14th, the breaking point arrived. It was a frigid afternoon. According to Kaspar, he was approached by a man, a stranger, who offered him the one thing he craved more than anything in the world: news of his mother. The man told him to come to the Ansbach Court Garden, a public park not far from Meyer's home. There he would finally get the answers he had sought his entire life. It was an irresistible lure. Ignoring all the warnings he had ever been given, Kaspar went. He walked through the desolate, snow-dusted park to the designated meeting spot, a monument to a local poet. And there the story takes its final violent turn. The stranger was waiting, but instead of giving him a letter, instead of whispering the name of his mother, the man pulled out a dagger. Kaspar said the man lunged, plunging the blade deep into his left side. As Kaspar staggered back in shock and agony, the man thrust a small purple silk purse into his hand and fled, vanishing into the winter gloom. Clutching his bleeding side, Kaspar stumbled back towards Meyer's house. He didn't scream for help. He didn't alert anyone in the park. He made his way home, a trail of blood drops marking his path in the snow. When he finally burst through the door, he didn't immediately show his wound. He first pointed Meyer towards the purse, gasping out, "Man, stab, knife, purse, court garden, go look." Meyer's first reaction was not concern. It was exasperation. He was convinced this was just another one of Kaspar's elaborate fabrications, another desperate play for attention. He scolded Kaspar for running through the house with muddy boots. He demanded to know what new lie this was. It was only when Kaspar, pale and swaying, lifted his coat to reveal a dark, spreading stain on his shirt that the schoolmaster's annoyance turned to horror. A doctor was summoned immediately. As they laid Kaspar down, the true severity of the situation became terrifyingly clear. The wound was deep. It was critical. While the doctor tended to Kaspar, the police were alerted. They rushed to the court garden, following the trail of blood to the monument. And there, lying in the snow, was the purple silk purse, just as Kaspar had described. Inside was not money, not a jewel, but a single folded piece of paper. The note was bizarre, written in a cramped script, and more strangely, it was written backwards in what's known as Spiegelschrift, or mirror writing. To read it, you had to hold it up to a mirror. When deciphered, the cryptic message read, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite accurately how I look and where I am from. To save Hauser the trouble, I want to tell you myself where I come from. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. I will even tell you the name M.L. Oh, it was the most tantalizing clue yet, and the most baffling. It seemed to be a direct confession from the assassin. But the more investigators looked at it, the stranger it became. Why would an assassin leave a clue, no matter how cryptic? Why write it in mirror writing, a trick that Kaspar himself had been known to practice? The grammar was awkward, the phrasing peculiar. Some experts who examined it later would claim that the specific errors and the style of the handwriting bore a striking resemblance to Kaspar's own. And the note was folded in a very specific, triangular fashion, a method that, according to several witnesses, Kaspar himself often used. The town of Ansbach was thrown into a state of panic and confusion. Was a shadowy assassin part of a grand conspiracy, still stalking the streets? Or was something else going on? Meanwhile, Kaspar was dying. For 3 days he lay in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The dagger had pierced his lung and nicked his liver. In his lucid moments, he was questioned relentlessly by police magistrate Johann von Feuerbach. Feuerbach, who had once been a staunch believer in Kaspar's royal origins, now harbored deep doubts. He pressed Kaspar on the details. The description of the attacker was vague. A man with dark whiskers wearing a large black coat. The story had holes. Why didn't he cry for help? Why did he focus on the purse instead of his wound when he got home? Kaspar stuck to his story. He repeated the details of the attack over and over, his voice growing weaker with each telling. He spoke of his life, of the darkness of his cell, of his endless longing for a mother he never knew. He prayed. He lamented that his life had been filled with so much suffering. To the very end, He maintained that he was the victim of a brutal, unprovoked attack. But as he lay on his deathbed, a darker theory was already taking hold, spreading in whispers through the town and among the investigators. This theory painted a completely different picture. It suggested there was no assassin. There was no shadowy stranger in a black coat. There was only Kaspar. The proponents of this theory argued that Kaspar, desperate to win back the fading affections and financial support of Lord Stanhope, had staged the entire event. He was terrified that Stanhope was about to abandon him completely. A new assassination attempt, they argued, would make him a martyr, a tragic hero once more. It would force Stanhope's hand and bring the world's sympathy rushing back. According to this version of events, Kaspar wrote the bizarre, mirror-written note himself. He folded it in his own peculiar way. He went to the park alone and stabbed himself with a small, sharp dagger. But something went horribly wrong. Perhaps he slipped on the icy ground. Perhaps he misjudged the angle or the force. The wound, intended to be superficial and dramatic, was instead deep and fatal. His desperate gamble for sympathy had become an accidental suicide. This theory explains so many of the inconsistencies. The police, searching the grounds, found only one set of footprints in the snow leading to and from the monument: Kaspar's. No one in the park had seen or heard anything, no struggle, no second man. And there was the note itself, a piece of evidence that felt almost too theatrical, too perfectly designed to deepen the mystery rather than solve it. On December 17, 1833, 3 days after the attack, Kaspar Hauser died from his wound. He was just 21 years old. His last audible words were a plea: "I did not do it myself." His death did not end the controversy. It ignited it. An autopsy was performed, and the findings only deepened the divide. The doctors confirmed that the wound was the cause of death, but they disagreed fiercely on whether it could have been self-inflicted. Some argued the angle of the blow made it nearly impossible for him to have done it to himself with such force. Others contended it was entirely possible, especially if he had been falling or stumbling as he did it. The official medical report was inconclusive, a hung jury of physicians. So Kaspar left the world just as he had entered it, as a complete and total enigma. Was he the murdered Prince of Baden, silenced at last by the conspirators who had stolen his throne? Or was he a tragically disturbed young man, a pathological liar whose final, most desperate deception had cost him his own life? His death provided no answers. It only left behind a single haunting question, etched onto his tombstone for all of history to ponder. Here lies Kaspar Hauser, riddle of his time. He was killed by a stranger's hand. But was he? The official investigation by the Ansbach court certainly didn't think so. Within weeks of Kaspar's death, they reached a startling conclusion, one that flew in the face of public opinion and the dramatic story Kaspar had gasped out on his deathbed. They declared that there was no murderer. There was no mysterious man in a dark coat, no whispered promise of secrets, no silk purse containing a cryptic note. There was only Kaspar. They concluded officially that Kaspar Hauser had stabbed himself. First, this sounds absurd. A desperate lie told by incompetent authorities eager to close a baffling case. But the more you scrutinize the evidence, the more the suicide theory begins to feel unervingly plausible. Let's start with the wound itself. The initial report from Dr. Horlicher, who first attended to Kaspar, noted it was a narrow, deep puncture wound to the left side of his chest. But at the autopsy, a crucial detail emerged. The blade had pierced his coat, his waistcoat, and his shirt, but it had then glanced off a rib, slid downwards, and punctured his lung and liver before finally nicking his stomach. It was a fatal wound, yes, but it was also a strangely inefficient one. An assassin intending to kill would likely aim for the heart with a direct, powerful thrust. This wound was angled, almost hesitant. One of the consulting physicians, a Dr. Heidenreich, was adamant. He argued that such a wound was entirely consistent with a self-inflicted injury, especially one delivered by a person who might flinch or hesitate at the last moment. Then there was the crime scene, or rather, the lack of one. The attack allegedly happened in the Ansbach court garden on a cold, wet December afternoon. The ground was soft, muddy, and lightly covered in snow. Yet, when investigators scoured the area around the monument where Kaspar claimed he was stabbed, they found only one set of footprints leading to and from the location: Kaspar's own. There were no other tracks, no signs of a struggle, No indication that a second person had ever been there. How could an assassin approach his victim, stab him, and then flee across soft, snowy ground without leaving a single trace? Seemed impossible. And what about the most tantalizing piece of evidence? The purple silk purse and the note inside. The note itself was a bizarre specimen, written in Spiegelschrift, or mirror writing, forcing one to hold it up to a mirror to read it. It was filled with grammatical errors and strange turns of phrase. When police compared the handwriting to known samples of Kaspar's own, the similarities were striking. The specific mistakes, the way certain letters were formed, it all pointed back to him. The police theorized that Kaspar, in his cell, had practiced writing backwards to create this piece of evidence. The note was meant to be the centerpiece of his story, a prop in a meticulously staged drama. But why? Why would he do this? To answer that, we have to look at the Kaspar Hauser of late 1833. He was no longer the darling of Europe. The public's fascination had cooled. His patron, Lord Stanhope, had abandoned him, publicly branding him a liar. His guardian, George Meyer, was a strict disciplinarian who was constantly trying to catch Kaspar in a lie. Kaspar was isolated, his credibility was in tatters, and the comfortable life he had grown accustomed to was slipping through his fingers. He was desperate, and he had done something like this before. Remember the suicide attempt in 1829? A minor self-inflicted cut to the forehead that he tried to pass off as an attack by a hooded assassin. That incident had successfully reignited public sympathy and brought him a new, more lenient guardian. The Ansbach court believed this was simply a tragic repeat performance. Kaspar, they argued, planned to stage another attack to prove his doubters wrong, to show everyone that the mysterious forces hunting him were real. He would become a victim again, worthy of pity and protection. He bought a new dagger, wrote a cryptic note, and went to the park to set the stage. The plan was not to die, but to create a superficial, dramatic wound. But this time in the cold, fumbling with the knife through his thick winter coat, he slipped. He pushed too hard. The wound was deeper, more serious than he ever intended. He stumbled home, not the victim of an assassin, but of a theatrical stunt gone horribly, fatally wrong. His final whispered words about his attacker weren't a deathbed confession, but the final desperate commitment to the lie that had come to define his entire life. It's a neat, logical, and deeply cynical theory. It dismisses the grand mystery and paints Kaspar not as a tragic prince, but as a pathetic fraud, a boy so trapped in his own fiction that he accidentally killed himself trying to sustain it. Closes the case, but it doesn't feel right. It leaves too many questions unanswered. Let's re-examine that wound. While Dr. Heidenreich argued for suicide, the two primary physicians at the autopsy, Drs. Albert and Kopp, came to the opposite conclusion. They were convinced it was homicide. They pointed to the sheer force required to drive a double-edged dagger through multiple layers of thick winter clothing and deep into the body. They argued it was highly unlikely that the frail Kaspar could have generated that much force himself, especially at the awkward angle required to strike his own chest. Furthermore, the dagger itself was found far from the monument, which seems inconsistent with someone who has just accidentally stabbed themselves and is stumbling home in a panic. And the footprints, or lack thereof, while compelling, it's not ironclad proof. A clever killer could have easily walked in Kaspar's own tracks, approaching from behind and retreating the same way. The initial police search may not have been as thorough as we imagine, especially in the fading light of a winter afternoon. But the biggest hole in the suicide theory is the note. If Kaspar wrote it himself to regain local sympathy in Ansbach, why would the note contain clues pointing away from the area entirely? It read, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the trouble, I want to tell you myself from where I come. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. I will even tell you the name M.L. Oh, why would Kaspar, in a desperate bid for attention from the people around him, create a clue that sent investigators on a wild goose chase to the French border? It makes no sense as a ploy. It makes far more sense as either a genuine clue left by a killer, or more likely, a piece of deliberate misdirection intended to confuse the authorities. The mirror writing, too, could have been a double bluff, a trick to make it look like an amateurish forgery pointing suspicion back at Kaspar. This is where we must confront the theory that the Ansbach court so conveniently dismissed. The theory that provides the one thing the suicide story lacks: a powerful, terrifying motive. The theory that Kaspar Hauser was, in fact, the hereditary prince of Baden, stolen from his cradle in 1812 and raised in a dungeon to clear the line of succession for a rival branch of the family. If this theory is true, then Kaspar Hauser was living with a target on his back. He wasn't a liar, he was a threat. A living, breathing existential threat to the ruling family of a German Grand Duchy. The first attack in 1829 wasn't a fake, it was a failed assassination. The gunshot incident in 1833 wasn't a fabrication, it was another attempt. And the stabbing in the Ansbach court garden was the final, successful act to silence him forever. His death wasn't an accident. It was a state-sponsored execution, carried out by a professional agent and covered up by local authorities who were either incompetent or complicit. The mastermind, according to this theory, was the Countess Louise Caroline von Hochberg, the second morganatic wife of the Grand Duke Karl Friedrich. Her children were not initially in the line of succession, but after the two male heirs from the first wife, including the infant Prince Kaspar was alleged to be, mysteriously died, her own son Leopold eventually ascended to the throne in 1830. For as long as Kaspar Hauser lived, he was a potential claimant, a rallying point for political enemies who could use his story to delegitimize Leopold's reign. With his death, the threat was neutralized for good. So we are left with two competing realities, two irreconcilable portraits of the same boy. In one, he is a pathological liar, a tragic con artist whose final deception cost him his life. In the other, he is the lost prince, the innocent victim of a ruthless political conspiracy, silenced just as he was on the verge of uncovering the truth of his identity. One story is psychologically plausible but feels small and unsatisfying. The other is grandiose, conspiratorial, and provides a motive worthy of the mystery, but rests on a mountain of circumstantial evidence. For over a century and a half, the debate raged, fueled by pamphlets, books, and endless speculation. The tombstone called him a riddle of his time, and so he remained, a historical enigma locked in the past. But history had one more card to play. In the late 20th century, a new kind of witness was called to the stand, one that could not lie, be bribed, or be mistaken. Science was about to enter the case of Kaspar Hauser, and it promised to finally separate the prince from the pauper. The first test came in 1996. The German magazine Der Spiegel, in a blaze of publicity, managed to secure a piece of the blood-stained underpants Kaspar was allegedly wearing on the day he was murdered. This was it, the moment of truth. Using mitochondrial DNA analysis, scientists extracted a sample from the bloodstain and compared it to two living female descendants of Stephanie de Beauharnais, the woman who would have been Kaspar's mother. The lab was silent, the world waited, and the result came back negative. There was no match. The DNA from the bloodstain was not related to the House of Baden. The news exploded across Germany. The fairy tale was over. The centuries-old conspiracy theory, the story of the lost prince, appeared to be definitively crushed by the cold, hard logic of genetics. Kaspar Hauser was not the heir to the throne. He was just Kaspar Hauser. But almost immediately, the doubts began to creep in. The underpants themselves had a complicated history, passed down through the family of the investigator, Anselm von Feuerbach. Who's to say the blood was even Kaspar's? Could it have been contaminated over the 160 years it sat in a box? Was the sample too degraded? The believers in the prince theory clung to these questions. They argued that you can't disprove a legend with a questionable piece of cloth. The case wasn't closed, it had just been complicated. The scientific proof was flawed, they insisted. And for 6 years that's where it stood. One test, one negative result, and a cloud of lingering doubt. Then, in 2002, a second group of scientists decided to try again. This time they would use different artifacts with a different chain of custody to avoid the controversies of the first test. They obtained a lock of hair that had been kept by Kaspar's guardian, as well as sweat-stained fabric from his hatband and trousers. This was a multi-pronged attack sourcing DNA from multiple distinct relics. They painstakingly extracted 6 different DNA samples, and they compared them, once again, to the genetic profile of the Baden line, this time represented by Astrid von Mettinger, another living descendant. The results of this second, more thorough test were announced on television, and they were stunning. The DNA from the hair, the hat, and the trousers was a match. The sequences were identical. According to the lead researcher, the probability that this was a coincidence was less than 1 in 100 million. The prince theory was back. The headlines reversed themselves. The boy from the dungeon, the foundling of Nuremberg, was the crown prince of Baden after all. Now the mystery was more maddening than ever before. Two scientific tests conducted by credible institutions had reached completely opposite conclusions. One said he was a pauper, the other said he was a prince. How could this be? The scientific community was divided. Supporters of the first test pointed out that mitochondrial DNA is more robust and less prone to contamination. Supporters of the second test argued their use of multiple, diverse samples made their conclusion far more reliable. The world was left in a state of scientific limbo. Both sides claimed victory, and the truth about Kaspar Hauser seemed to be a matter of which scientific report you chose to believe. For 2 decades the stalemate held. The prince and the pauper continued their ghostly battle, now fought in the sterile environment of DNA labs. But the story of science is a story of progress. Technology that was unimaginable in 1996, or even 2002 became commonplace. And in 2024, a third final and truly definitive investigation was launched. This wasn't just another small test. This was the Manhattan Project of the Kaspar Hauser case. A team of international geneticists from the world's leading institutes used the most advanced techniques available. They didn't just use a few markers. They sequenced Kaspar's entire genome from multiple hair samples. And most importantly, they didn't just compare it to living relatives who are separated by generations. They went straight to the source. They were given permission to test the remains of his supposed mother, Stephanie de Beauharnais herself. This was the ultimate comparison. Mother and son. There would be no ambiguity, no statistical noise, no room for error. The team sequenced Kaspar's DNA. They sequenced Stephanie's DNA. They laid the two genetic blueprints side by side. And they found nothing. No connection. No link. Not even a remote one. The advanced genomic analysis proved, beyond any shadow of a statistical doubt, that Kaspar Hauser was not the son of Stephanie de Beauharnais. He was not the Prince of Baden. The most powerful scientific tools of the 21st century had been brought to bear on this 19th century mystery, and they had delivered a clear, final verdict. The royal conspiracy, the story that had captivated Europe for 200 years, was in the end just that, a story. But here is the great final irony of Kaspar Hauser. In solving the one question we thought was most important, science has made the entire mystery infinitely deeper. If he wasn't a prince, then the simple, elegant motive for his entire life's tragedy disappears. The dynastic plot was the glue that held the story together. It explained everything: the imprisonment, the secrecy, the assassination attempts, the final murder. It was all a rational, albeit cruel, series of acts to secure a throne. Without that motive, what are we left with? If Kaspar Hauser was not a prince, then who was he? Why would anyone take an ordinary child, lock him in a tiny dark cell for more than a decade, feeding him only bread and water, stunting his mind and body, and then release him into a world he couldn't comprehend? Why would assassins be sent after a nobody? Who would stab a random, mentally scarred young man in a park, and for what possible reason? The royal plot provided a villain. The Countess of Hochberg provided a reason. Now there is no villain. There is no reason. There is only a void. The murder of a prince makes a grim kind of sense. The lifelong torture and murder of a complete unknown is an act of profound, inexplicable madness. And so, we are thrown back to the beginning. We are left with the same questions they had in 1828, standing in the Nuremberg town square. Who is this boy? Where did he come from? And what evil was done to him? The science that was meant to give us the final chapter ended up erasing the only explanation we ever had, leaving the pages blank. In the end, perhaps that is the true legacy of Kaspar Hauser. He is not the answer to a historical puzzle. He is the puzzle itself. He was a mirror, and for 2 centuries, everyone who looked at him saw a reflection of their own beliefs. The Romantics saw a noble savage, a child of nature. The conspiracists saw a lost prince. The cynics saw a clever fraud. The scientists saw a genetic code to be deciphered. But the real Kaspar, the boy who loved his toy horse and stared at the candle flame, remains forever out of reach. He is a testament to the fact that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to challenge us. His story forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that we cannot always know the truth, that history has gaps, and some voids can never be filled. Kaspar Hauser walked out of the darkness and into our world for 5 brief, bewildering years. He showed us the fragility of human identity, the cruelty of which we are capable, and the desperate need we have to find patterns in stories, even where none exist. And then, just as mysteriously as he arrived, he was extinguished, leaving behind only a bloodstain, a few strange artifacts, and a question mark that hangs over history, silent and eternal. He was the child of Europe, and his secret died with him.